Welcome to the last session of the day, a session on transfer pricing. We are privileged to have with us Mr. Kamlesh Varshney, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Finance, for this session. Our other key speakers are Ms. Fatima Hunaid, Chartered Accountant from Bangalore, Mr. S. Vasan, Senior Vice President, Hinduja Global, and Mr. Abhinav Sognai, Head of Tax, Skoda Auto Volkswagen India Limited. Before I hand over to Fatima, I will just like to give a brief introduction about her. She has about 20 years of experience in transfer pricing, consulting, and is named as one of the women leaders of in tax in India for the year 2022, and also for 5 years in a row by International Tax Review in its guides featuring leading women tax advisors worldwide. Her professional transfer pricing consulting experience includes advising multinational enterprises at every stage of the transfer pricing value, implementation assistance, price setting and intercompany agreement reviews, global transfer pricing projects, defense before the Indian Revenue Appellate Authorities, building transfer pricing documentation, transfer pricing due diligence, etc. I would like to invite Fatima to introduce her panelist and to conduct the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Abha, and very good afternoon. I have with me Mr. Kamlesh Varshney, who is the Joint Secretary Tax Policy with the Indian Ministry of Finance. Going a bit into a bit of a detail into his background, Mr. Varshney is an officer of the Indian Revenue Service 1990 batch and has worked in tax administrations of India and Papua New Guinea, not only as a tax auditor but also as a policy maker. He has represented India in international forums and concluded many tax treaties and mutual agreement procedure cases. In his current role, he is responsible for preparing the finance bill containing government proposals for various reforms amendments to the Income Tax Act and direct taxes in general. He is also a part of the team which prepares government's response to various digital taxation proposals of the OECD Inclusive Framework. He was involved in rolling out the APA program in India and was its first APA commissioner. He has personally overseen and concluded more than 120 APAs, which is almost half of all the APAs concluded till date, in a short span of time. He has also worked as a commissioner in international taxation and transfer pricing, supervising various audits in these areas. His work in Papua New Guinea for almost 5 years entailed helping the tax department there in capacity building and widening and deepening of tax base. He has been impaneled by the UNDP as an expert for helping developing countries in their tax administrations. He is also fond of teaching and has taught in various prestigious institutes of India as well as in the academies of the Income Tax Department. He is a prolific speaker and an author on international tax and transfer pricing. Welcome, Mr. Vasan. Mr. Vasan is a Senior Vice President, Global Taxation, Hinduja Global Solutions Limited. He's a cost accountant, LLB, postgraduate in commerce, as well as business administration. He holds a doctoral degree in transfer pricing from the Madurai Kamraj University. He was an advocate in practice, enrolled with the Delhi Bar Council, arguing cases before courts in India and abroad for clients. He has over 30 years of experience working with various multinational companies like DuPont, General Motors, Dr. Reddy's Labs, amongst others. In his current role with AGS, which is a listed ITES company, he is involved in corporate restructuring, tax planning opportunities for the company. Vasan has also been a visiting faculty to the Loyola Institute of Business Administration, Chennai, teaching final year MBA students on M&A and corporate taxation. He's authored a book on transfer pricing audit practices in India, published by LexisNexis, amongst a few other books as well. He's also been a guest speaker at various colleges, universities, and also in association with various chambers. Welcome, Vasan. Abhinav Sogani, our third panelist, is the head of tax, India Center of Excellence, Skoda Auto Volkswagen India Private Limited. He graduated with an honors degree in commerce. He's completed his chartered accountancy in 2002 and started his career with KPMG in India, where he worked for around 5 years. But then, since 2011, he has been working with the Volkswagen Group. In his current role, he heads the tax function under the Center of Excellence arrangement, covering various Volkswagen Group companies. He is responsible for transfer pricing, including base erosion and profit shifting related compliances in India for the group. Welcome, Abhinav. Great. So, we will start off with a brief presentation and then move into a panel discussion where I would pose several top of the mind questions on transfer pricing issues that corporate India is facing currently. FY 2021 has been the first financial year which has seen the impact unleashed by the COVID pandemic. And while all of us were grappling each day, trying to be safe, trying to stay alive, keeping our businesses afloat, transfer pricing is a reality that needs to be addressed by taxpayers and tax administrations and all of us alike with agility and appropriately so that there is certainty. Apart from other things, a lot of clarity is also expected from the government, and we will discuss and deliberate that during the course of the session today. On agenda today are the four aspects showing up on the screen. Firstly, a quick run past of what are the predominant COVID-19 impact on operations and related party transactions. Secondly, a run through of the guidance that the OECD issued last December. Thirdly, what are the considerations that need to be factored in while documenting the COVID 19 impact in the transfer pricing documentation or policy considerations? And lastly, defending transfer pricing positions adopted, preparing for defense. Moving ahead, largely addressing transfer pricing for businesses comprises a life cycle from planning, implementation, documentation, and preparing for defense. As we lived through the last financial year, there was hardly any time to be adequately planned from an arm's length documentation or policy perspective because, as I mentioned, we were just in the throes of the pandemic. Having said that, these two are ongoing considerations that are predominant as we stare at Omicron and other uncertainties that can come up. Planning and implementing, having the impact in mind on the transfer pricing from an arm's length point of view continues to be important. So, what are some of the aspects? Predominantly from a cost point of view, there have been losses incurred due to falling sales, falling demands, resulting in unused capacity. So, can the compensation for services for cost plus service providers be reduced? I have been in discussion with clients that express their inability to continue to compensate, but more than willing to retain the employees and not have their families take the consequential impact of the pandemic or closures. Therefore, it's important to identify and allocate abnormal, exceptional, non recurring expenses that are coming out of the pandemic. The other impact was undeniably on the functional profile or the business models of the company. Historically, there are tried and tested models: entrepreneur, low risk service provider, low risk distributor, contract manufacturer, etc. But the pandemic has not, has impacted everybody alike. So, therefore, a business case for reviewing the traditional transfer pricing models, and OECD has issued a guidance on that. Um, Again, how can the force majeure clause be included in the intercompany related party agreement? Is it fair to expect the associated enterprise, which is the entrepreneur in most of the cases of captive service providers in India, should it only be the one that bears the entire burden of the pandemic? Business restructuring as a result of the pandemic, how does that impact and how should that be factored in the documentation from a function, risk, and asset point of view? Moving ahead. Financial transactions, of course, there have been moratoriums the RBI has announced last year, and companies have benefited out of that. But having said that, in the context of intercompany lending and financing, moratorium is also a reality. And therefore, last year would have led to renegotiation of existing arrangements in terms of lowered market rates or, like I said, temporary moratorium, etc. Now, what is the impact of this on our thin capitalization rules, which limit the amount of deduction on account of interest to a percentage of the EBITDA? There would have been new loans and guarantees given in order to help companies stay afloat and continue in their business. So, how does this need to be treated? In terms of intra-group service arrangements, royalty comes up, and it was and has been put on hold for impacted entities. There has been a strong case for renegotiating royalty arrangements and keeping a pause if required. In terms of management support, this is one of the biggest areas where our companies and clients have seen increased attention from the management, obviously, for keeping the company running, seeing what best needs to be done, and therefore, what is the cost that can get allocated on account of the additional functions that are being performed, whether these services are shareholder function or that was a function from which the companies have derived benefit. Summarizing the key guidance issued by the OECD in December 2020, use of contemporaneous information. Very important to factor this in the documentation. Document and chart out the change in sales volumes, what has been the impact on the industry. A number of reports are available, and it would be very useful to link that with your business realities and the impact faced by the companies. What is the capacity utilized for related versus unrelated transactions? Now, these are some of the factors which the OECD has pointed out, but there could be others which you have faced and which would need to be documented. What are the incremental exceptional costs which have been incurred by the parties? And government grants and interventions that have been availed of by the companies. Now, in terms of addressing information deficiencies, very often we've seen there have been instances where you are not able to produce hardcore statistics or industry information or documentation like that. So how do you kind of include that in the documentation? Exercise of reasonable judgment. The companies did the best they could in order to respond to some of the realities that were facing their businesses. So how do you document that? Allow for arm's length test outcome testing approach. What is the external market and independent party reality, and allow that for including in related party transactions as well. Again, very often we've seen one method does not necessarily result in the best or estimation of arm's length scenario. So use multiple methods and do your best in terms of demonstrating arm's length in your related party transactions as well. In terms of comparables, historically, loss making companies have been excluded, stating that in an arm's length scenario, when everything is above board or when everything is ideal, typically a company ought not to be incurring losses. But here is a guidance where during the COVID impacted year, including loss making comparables in the set would ideally show a more appropriate outcome of the arm's length analysis. Thirdly, relying on budgeted financial information. Very important to kind of see if you can prepare detailed profit and loss analysis with explanations on what have been the variations in the COVID impacted year versus the budgeted financial information. Profitability adjusted to outcome without COVID. So, how does it look with the COVID impact and other than COVID? I mean, in a normal scenario, and therefore build the bridge to demonstrate how it has impacted your financials. Rationale or evidence for increased allocation of costs or reduced sales. Typically, month by month or year on year analysis, comparison with the previous analysis would help one demonstrate these aspects. All these just indicate that having a roll forward documentation is not going to really help you support all of these different scenarios that you've faced, and it's critical that you make use of all of these data points and realities and translate them into the documentation that you might produce before the income tax authorities. Period of data used to evaluate arm's length pricing. Now, according to the OECD, in India already multiple data usage is already allowed, and it remains to be applicable under this new scenario as well, which is useful. And we will pick up the outcome in terms of statistical measures when we pose questions to our panelists as well. Have separate testing periods which can allow companies to average out the impact of the COVID between the COVID impacted year and as the company starts to see normalization, hopefully. Intercorrelation of methods, comparables, and within the testing period. So, in lay terms, it would be that make use of methods, different methods, the comparable data, and see if across testing periods, across financial years, we are able to make sense and bring it all together and demonstrate the impact and therefore justify the transfer pricing. This slide just charts out the COVID 19 guidance provided by other jurisdictions in terms of documentation. We still await guidance from the Indian government. But some of the things which stand out on this slide are Singapore, Hong Kong, Czech Republic, and New Zealand actually allow and acknowledge the fact that even low risk bearing entities may incur losses. Again, they've also allowed block or term testing, which means multiple years taken together, particularly if COVID has been really harsh on your company's business. There's also been guidance that if companies have availed government assistance, then that can't be reduced from the cost base. And of course, Singapore, Hong Kong, Czech, and New Zealand again allowing inclusion of loss making comparables. So, this guidance, I would like to clarify, is over and above the OECD guidance, which provides that much needed clarity to the taxpayers operating in these companies operating in these countries. Lastly, so we've seen planning, implementation, documentation. Coming to advanced pricing agreement, this has been a single most useful dispute mitigation mechanism in India and has been very effective. Till date, to give a quick statistic, about 240 APAs have been concluded with an average time of just short of 3 years. And this is as per the statistics published in up to financial year 18-19 and released in 2019. Of course, the ground level experience post 19, even before the pandemic, has been companies, and we faced some sort of a delay in concluding APAs. In terms of bilateral, about 31 are signed off, and there must have been more during the last couple of years, but we await the statistics from the government. And the average closure just short of 4 years. In terms of advanced pricing agreements, again, COVID related guidance would be much appreciated. For example, where APAs are already concluded and there is a collection period which is defined in the APA, then can that be relaxed? Because in some of the recent APAs that are closed, about a 30-day period, collection period is still being put. So, is that realistic? Is that in line with the economic reality? Again, in terms of applications that under process and have the COVID impacted year, how does that kind of make the APA and the critical terms that are being incorporated align with the reality as they unfold during the APA period, which is a 5-year prospective period. This is some of the APA guidance provided by the OECD, and in addition, we've pulled out some of the guidance published by other countries as well. As per the OECD, one can uphold the concluded APA unless the conditions are such that the APA needs to be revoked, cancelled, or revised. And potential outcomes of breach could be breach means breach of critical assumptions, that relate to the functions, etc. If those are breached, then either they can revise, revoke, or cancel. This is the guidance of the OECD. Pretty much the guidance also is available in our current APA rules. Having said that, other countries have given guidance in terms of Singapore, I'd like to point out. They say that the APA signatory can come back to the government and explain why the terms have been breached and suggest the next possible course of action instead of just giving hardlined kind of exits of cancelling, revoking, etc. There is that mid path which has been prescribed by the Singapore government. For ongoing APAs, they've opened it out to say that let's discuss alternatives and put the case on hold, and then finally, if required, terminate the APA. Australia has come out and issued guidance which again prescribe continue the APA, renegotiate for demonstrable period impacted, which means out of the 5 years, if the last 2 years are impacted by APA, in concluded APAs, then let's renegotiate if you're able to demonstrate impact on those years. Suspend or modify for a set period. Now, this is the guidance issued by Australia. Malaysia has a contrarian kind of guidance issued where they have said that for ALP determination, pre-COVID conditions only will be considered. Taxpayers can choose either they continue or withdraw the applications. And term testing can be considered on case to case basis. By term testing, I mean more than 1 year taken together and tested for arm's length. So, if a method is agreed, then test it for multiple years rather on a year by year basis. Transfer pricing safe harbors, as you must be aware, and as a lot of companies over the years have started accessing, have been issued. Recently, they earlier safe harbors were again reconfirmed for financial year 2021 as well, with no reference to any of the COVID conditions. So, FICCI, in association with Grant Thornton Bharat, has released a thought leadership document which goes into the details of how the safe harbors can be relaxed and softened so that more companies are able to access. The reason being that safe harbor provides a much needed clarity. If this is your transaction, for example, software services, as long as you declare a profitability of say 17%, provided the revenue threshold prescribed is met, then your case will be accepted. So that removes all further litigation and the company can continue to focus on their business. So here recommendations have been made tying to how much how should the thresholds be softened. That guidance is also kind of included in the report and placed before the CBDT for their consideration in the upcoming union budget and the subsequent regulations that may be announced. And their specific formula have been put out as a suggestion. Of course, they can be taken and modified. For example, if a company is able to hold on to employment up to a particular level, then the prescribed safe harbor into 85% can be made applicable to that particular company, and similar suggestions across. Um, Lastly, if a company is not accepting or going by the APA route or the safe harbor route, the routine course of audit also can be made clearer both for the taxpayers as well as for the tax department by sharing the risk parameters for reference to the transfer pricing officer, or if not sharing, then at least uh, modifying that in a way that has adequate consideration to COVID impact. For example, in the past, if loss has been a consideration for referring, then there that can be modified, acknowledging the fact that there have been far too many companies that have had to face that unfortunate scenario. Again, I've heard this from a lot of quarters guidance to field officers on how to deal with transfer pricing audits for COVID affected years. Now, this I have quickly covered. The report primarily addresses all the dimensions of current transfer pricing safe harbors, starting from rationalization of operating margins to thresholds, exclusion of certain costs that are COVID costs, for example, prescribing that. In terms of financial transactions, widening the applicability of safe harbors even to inbound cases of inbound guarantee, inbound loans, etc. And with that, we'll quickly move on to our panel discussion. Thank you, team. So let me come to you first, Vasan. What, according to you, are the most concerning areas for multinational enterprises from a tax and specifically transfer pricing perspective in a post-COVID area, over and above what I've kind of brought to the forefront?
Yeah, it's a very very broad question. Of course, the impact is too much, particularly to auto sector and even our own ITES sector where I work. In few of the segments of the ITES, it's not all green for ITES as well. So basically, because of the volume drop drastically, and because the capacity utilization has been a challenge. So these two major factors lead to non-operating expenses which could not be apportioned to the revenues. And when we look at the comparable test from a benchmarking perspective, there we have a challenge. So when we do a comparable with the Indian companies which are into diversified activities where we don't have a specific segment where I do operate, is going to be a real challenge for us in demonstrating whether my margins are at arm's length or not. And that is specifically where when I'm carrying overheads which can't be mapped to my revenues and attributable and a profit could not be derived, those all should be taken out of my margins for comparability purpose. And also when I do the comparability with a diversified product lines of those comparable companies, there also I need to see if an adjustment could be affected to make myself comparable on apple to apple basis.
Thank you, Vasan. Mr. Vashne, if I could come to you, what would be on top of your mind overall in terms of taxpayers and tax administration in terms of COVID-19? What needs to be addressed?
No, definitely there are practical challenges, as Mr. Vasan stated. And if you see the OECD transfer pricing guideline, which you referred to in your presentation, also have tried to address those challenges, like what Mr. Vasan referred to, that when comparables are not available, how do I compare? So those general principles have been discussed. So if you notice, that transfer pricing guidelines issued by OECD has reiterated arm's length principle, has reiterated that OECD transfer pricing guidelines are still valid even in COVID times. But certain practical challenges, they have tried to address those. For example, for comparable, some of the suggestions that they have given, we already have in our law. So what they have said is that probably you should have that outcome testing approach. So if you get a comparable at the time of filing of return, and that also you can do your comparability analysis at that point of time. And if you need to adjust your pricing before filing the return, you should be allowed to do that. And we already have those provisions in our Income Tax Act. So we allow you to adjust your arm's length price. We allow you to take comparables at a later point of time. So those provisions are already there. So to that extent, those practical difficulties which are being faced by taxpayers are to some extent being addressed. But yes, that is true that sometime for one specific period you might find it difficult to get particularly when you are dealing with multiple products. what Mr. Vasan referred to. And when we know that the economic outlook has changed depending on the product that you are dealing with, depending on the services that you are providing. So, for example, if you are in a particular like maybe auto products, then you are you have felt more hit. But if you are in some other some other products like medical medicines, medical products, then probably your profit may have zoomed. Similarly, for services, IT services have actually performed very well during COVID period. So if you see the results of IT companies, they have really exceeded the expectation, while the tourism sector, another service industry, may have suffered. So if you are in a different product line within a company, different services, and you have international transaction in all of them, then probably the challenges are higher. That is true, but surely those OECD guidelines are definitely there for us, for everybody, all the countries who have been part of that guidelines to help. And what is important in that guideline is that probably something that they have referred to is that adopt a flexible approach. So that's a very important point that has been made out there. So I'm sure once that is taken care of, the things would be better than what it was before when COVID impacted and suddenly we didn't know what to do.
Sure. Abhinav, what would be your take on top of your mind concerns to be addressed?
Yeah, thanks, Fatima. Basically, I would agree to Mr. Vasan and also Mr. Kamlesh Varshney that comparability analysis is going to be a real challenge. And I would just like to elaborate a little more. The point is, when I'm filing my transfer pricing documentation today, I do not know how the comparables have panned up for fiscal year 2021. And that's the biggest challenge which currently I'm facing. That when I'm closing my transfer pricing audit, what benchmark should I take? Because honestly, my company or the auto sector in general is facing challenges from a COVID perspective. And then because of the reduced margins, how do I benchmark it with the comparables where I do not have the clarity today? So that's one. And also one point which Mr. Varshney, I wanted to just check with you. I just was reminded of the fact that in the past, there were certain discussions on the fact that should we do a block audit? Block assessment, how it is there for the developed economies. So possibly on that front, if we have that clarity, then or a thought process, then that would help from a long-term perspective.
Right now, we don't have that concept of block assessment. So basically, what you are trying to say is that, instead of matching 1 year 2021 result with 2021 of comparables, we take maybe 3 years together and 3 years of comparable together and then try to check whether term test is satisfied, and that term could be 3 years or it could be anything different. So those concepts, or it could be the other way around. Block assessment could always be that we will still do 1 year testing, but we will do 4 or 5 years assessment together. So block assessment could have two meaning. Probably the later one that I refer to may not help you at all. But it is only administratively, it is more convenient for the taxpayer and the tax department that you do the block assessment together, but you remain, to the basic principle of comparing year-to-year comparison. So right now, it is not there, and because it will also require a lot of changes into our system. If we ever shift to block assessment, it is one idea which is not that government is against it. Government is always trying to reduce compliances and bring ease of compliance for the taxpayers. And yes, this could be one idea for that purpose. But at this point of time, let us understand that when COVID has impacted industry, COVID has also impacted government. And, so government employees were also in the hospitals and they were also suffering. So anything that is, changes that has to be brought in, also we need to factor in that whether our system are ready. We all know that new system, IT system was implemented this year, and that took some time to stabilize. So any reform that we need to take place have to sync with our system as well. So it's a good proposal. I don't know whether you were referring to the first part or second part of block assessment, But yes, these are something for the future tax reforms. Definitely, something that government can always consider.
Yeah,
But
certainly
not
I
at
was
this
referring
stage.
to the first part of the,
Yeah,
I was
right.
referring to the first part of it. Thank you so much.
So the next question, Mr. Vashne, I'd like to come back to you. So we refer to the OECD guidance. Now, is there anything on the annual that companies and tax payers can expect from the government? Also, a guidance to the field formation and the tax officers in terms of how they should apply the OECD guidance. An
So
acknowledgement would provide that clarity.
yeah, right. So basically, when you were presenting that particular slide on what other countries have come out with a guidance other than OECD guidance, so I noticed that amongst the big countries who have bigger cases of transfer pricing, probably I could notice only two cases, Australia and Canada, and that too only, they provided guidance on government assistance, so nothing much. So why? And see, let's try to understand that OECD guidance itself says that probably we won't deviate from arm's length principle, we won't deviate from OECD transfer pricing guidelines. Only we need to address the practical challenges. And that is correct because transfer pricing is a fact-finding exercise. And it is not easy to, say that in this situation, you will do this, in this situation, you will do this. And therefore, if you read OECD guidance also, it provides a lot of flexibility in application, even after, even while addressing COVID impact. So that is how transfer pricing guidelines would be, that they will be more general in nature. They cannot be very specific that, I will do this in this situation. That probably nobody will be able to say. So to that extent, OECD guidance is quite useful. So from Indian perspective, I think what is needed is that we probably don't need another set of guidance note, but training is something which is always a continuous process, and we keep on training our officers. So when these audits for the COVID period come up, we will also like train our officers just like we do it every year. And when we train our officers, then obviously OECD TP guidance note is will always be on our desk because we are also one of the country who has signed on and those guidance note. So I think that is a better approach, that we have training so that we have a more meaningful approach while doing TP audit.
Thank you, Mr. Vashne. Abhinav, I would like to come to you. Now, you spoke about, rather, I kind of summarized the advanced pricing agreement statistics around it and how useful it has been industry, especially in dispute mitigation, as a mechanism and as a scheme. And I know you have a lot of ground level experience in doing bilateral APAs with multiple countries. So, could you share your experience and also some inputs into, especially with reference to COVID impact? How could the APA be more effective and more corporates could kind of access that route?
Yeah, thanks, Fatima. So I must say that incidentally, I happened to be in Germany and got the opportunity to also have some virtual meetings or con calls with the German competent authorities. And I'm quite happy to say that when it comes to the Indian competent authorities and the interaction was much more friendly in nature as compared to German, which is more formal and was not that so much friendly for me, at least. And also, when we were discussing with them, they were quite appreciative of the fact that the Indian competent authorities are used to or coming forward for virtual hearings. So this is something which I think is something which is really helpful, because in the pre-COVID era, I think we all were used to have physical or face-to-face meeting, which was taking a lot of time. Because of those virtual meetings, I think the time for negotiation and the APA conclusion will be much more faster. That's what I believe. I think one of the areas which, again, based on my ground level experiences, that if the staff at the APA level could be increased, because currently, if I talk about the APAs which we have filed while the case is going on, but when we meet the ground level officers, they are also too much tied up with the existing stuff. So possibly that's one of the suggestion which could be considered. And also, I'm not sure whether it's possible, but if there could be certain time frame for conclusion of the APA, because some of the APAs in our case also are there since quite long. And I think this correlates with the fact that the staff needs to be increased.
Sure, thank you, Abhinav. Mr. Varshney, I'd like to kind of just add a little bit to what Abhinav mentioned and request your response to that. Would be like advance pricing agreement is meant for future years. And over the course of last few years, companies have experienced significant delays in closure of the APA process, so much so that the advance pricing period covered itself has become a past period. So companies have had to go through simultaneous audits, litigation, documentation while negotiating APA. So a couple of things which could make the scheme even more effective would be, as Abhinav mentioned, staffing. The other is also kind of try and have a timeline around it. So what would be your input on that front?
See, the first point on the delays. Let us try to understand that delay could be from both sides. I'm not blaming one side or the other side. A delay could be from both sides, and both sides have been impacted by COVID. So there could be delay from the taxpayer that they were not able to file the responses in time because of COVID, and also from our side, because as I said earlier, that even our officers were impacted by COVID. So it is like a something that each one of us was struggling during those period. And it is quite natural that while activities which are which are essential, they continue. For example, our government presented the budget was passed, all the rules which were required to be made were made, even though, everyone was struggling. I remember, I have a team of 13 officers. During the month of April and May, I was the only officer here. But still, we were ruling out all those which was required to be done by the circulars or rules or everything, because those essential services must continue. Somehow APA probably, because it is kind of a negotiation and all. So naturally, it is a natural outcome. I mean, I'm not saying, I have been the part of the team which basically established APA in India. So I have my heart always for APA. But it is quite natural that activities like APA will suffer during such time when focus is only on essential things. You need to, just like even for companies, they just need to keep their machinery going during difficult times. So it is very natural. And I don't know about other countries, but I'm quite sure that other countries' APA numbers would have also suffered during this period. So that is one part. Staff constraint, yes, you could. There is always a case for putting more staff in APA, looking at the inventory which is there. But once again, department also has limited number of staff, and they have to perform all those activities. Somehow, the recruitment in income tax department is only at one level. You can't have recruitment at different level. Lateral entry is what is generally known as. So that lateral entry is not there. So basically, whatever staff you have, whatever number of officers you have to allocate amongst different functions. So that constraint is already there. But even with that constraint, if you see that in last 3-4 months, there is a sudden focus on APA, and more cases are getting finalized. So CBDT and the Department of Revenue is fully aware of the focus they need to give, the importance they need to give to APA, and they are fully committed to the case that we need to start disposing APA faster. So that commitment is there. On that last point of having a time frame, from my practical experience, I can say that if you put a timeline that this APA must be finished in 1 year or 2 years, I think the APA program would be a big failure. I can tell you this from my experience, because APA program is that you have to negotiate, you have to arrive at a negotiated solution. Otherwise, what will happen is that if you put a 2 years time limit, the two parties do not arrive at a negotiated solution, then that case will be closed. Then after 2 years, it will not be taken up.
Sure.
Because it is how can you give a time frame for a negotiated solution? That is something everybody need to consider, and therefore probably putting a time limit on this negotiation function may be a bit difficult.
Sure, I do
Kamlesh,
understand
I
that.
would like to
Yes, Vasan.
interject here. See, we have this DRP where we will cut short the time delay before the CIT appeal. So this DRP has seen its light, and over a period that has been the way forward for all the assessees who have a transfer pricing disputes. Same way, when we have APA with a longer duration for disposal, it loses its charm. So maybe that's where from we are coming for a 2-year time frame for a unilateral and a bilateral of say 4 to 5 years should be a good dispute resolution process or an alternate resolution process for instead of long drawn transfer pricing disputes which go up to 5 years and 10 years like that, and which also keeps the ease of doing business also under check when we have so much longer gestation period. In fact, even I would suggest rather than having a full-blown APAs, can all those routine templated international transactions between AEs be put into one basket and disposed of as quick as possible rather than a complicated royalty or IP related, which I do agree will have a long drawn discussions and documentation.
Yes, I mean, see, we can't compare APA with DRP. DRP does not have a negotiation part. DRP only have to rule whether you like it or you don't like it. That is not in APA. APA, both party must like it. So that's a difference. And let me make it clear. I'm not saying that APA should not be disposed of fast, but that should be handled administratively, not legally. So legally, you should not have any time limitation. Administratively, yes. Administratively, there could always be internal guidelines that if this is a simple case, this needs to be completed within this time, and if it is a complex case, it needs to be completed within this time. So that is perfectly fine. And focus should be, what your suggestions are most on the administration side to speed up disposal of APA, and they are good suggestions. I agree with them.
I just have one point, Fatima, here. When we talk about the APA, which is continuing for quite long, what happens in the background is when I go for the APA, and as you said, at times the time duration for the APA period is already gone, and it's more of a post facto event where the negotiations are going on. And practical challenges, what some of the MNCs or the companies face is that by the time I have already filed the appeal before the tribunal and it is kept on hold, and then there are certain tax demands which are also there. And practically what happens is at times when you go to the tribunal to seek the stay, you have to kind of explain again and again, and at times it becomes challenging for us to take a stay of demand for a long period with the fact that APA is going on. So my point is, I'm aware of the fact that some of the APAs or some of the countries with which India has treaty, or where the international transactions are going on, for example, US, UK, there is a paper or a document which is signed between the two companies to have an automatic stay of demand. Could that be extended to other countries as well?
No, those are only for 4 countries, and that's bilaterally. It was for MAP cases, not for APA cases. So it is only for MAP cases, and it's only with 4 countries.
Yeah. So my request or my point is, can those kind of negotiations be done for other countries also? Because
see, bilateral arrangements are bilateral because they are give and take whenever you come for some bilateral negotiation. So it is it's difficult. I mean, probably it is not right to expect that if India has entered into a bilateral agreement with one country, that should automatically be applied to another country. I mean, it's always the bilateral solutions are always based on the mutual interest of both the nations. So it is difficult to say what will happen, when some other country comes on table for a similar arrangement.
Sure, I think this is a fair expectation. At the same time, we acknowledge that it needs to be mutually agreed between the two countries. And in terms of tax payouts, Mr. Vashne, this is like really top priority. And one suggestion from people who are undergoing the APA process. Mr. Vashne, if I could stay with you and get your thoughts on, the impact of change in the risk profile. Like captive service provider, for example, has been required to be compensated at a fixed rate no matter what, even if the AE is investing in IP or just breaking ground, new market with new products, etc. in the past. But can that continue to be followed in a COVID impacted world? And is the department, from a policy point of view, willing to consider now that yes, captives can earn less? Because the reality, Mr. Vashne, is these are captives being benchmarked with full risk entrepreneurial companies who will now also be, in cases, experiencing losses. So, would love to get your thoughts on that.
See, I think first of all, it is not that I remember when we were in APA. So it is not that we took full risk IT companies into comparables and did not give some kind of an adjustment. We did some kind of adjustment, and because there were difference in risk profiling. And because of that, we agreed to a rate which was lower than what was coming in comparability analysis of those risk-bearing comparables. So that is not correct to say that in the pre-COVID time we were using comparables. Yes, we were using those comparables, but we were making those adjustments as well. Now, even OECD guidance note on COVID, which you refer to, is saying that it is not that automatically if you are a low risk entity and there is a loss, then that loss should be transferred to you. Now, why is that loss? We have to delineate the transaction, that whether that loss is because of the risk which is not assumed by you, then that loss should not come to you. Now, this is something that even OECD is saying in its guidance note after COVID. So same principle needs to apply, that if you are a limited risk distributor, then it does not mean, and you are not taking marketplace risk, then if there is a loss due to less in demand, then you cannot bear that loss. So that loss must go to the person who is taking that market risk. So this needs to be seen. Now, if you are a low risk entity or risk-free IT service provider in India, first of all, I mean, if you actually see IT service result in India, it is better than the pre-COVID period. So probably there is no case for even, I would say, because you are low risk entity, there is no case for even higher margin than before. Otherwise, if you were not a low risk entity, then one could have said that you should also get that extra profit which IT companies have made during this COVID time. Initially when there was a COVID, it did appear that probably it will hit IT companies also, and probably the share market price of those IT companies in March 2020 is a reflection of that. But suddenly people realize that actually IT companies are going to make more profit, because work from home came out to be a better alternative than work from office. You probably got better output and with much lesser cost. All those costs got eliminated. Commutation cost, your electricity cost, rental cost, so many other costs, traveling costs, all costs got eliminated, and suddenly you had higher profit for IT companies.
Absolutely.
So and I don't know what happened after I left APA, but in my time, more than 50% APA were of IT companies. So frankly speaking, I don't know what you are referring to. I don't actually see a case where one can come and say, now I'm a low risk entity, and therefore, you reduce my margin for APA period.
Mr. Vashne, you're absolutely right when we talk about IT in general. But there are companies that are aligned with certain verticals, like leisure, like travel, like auto, for example, and those back office have actually taken a brunt where they were not able to be productive. I'd like to pull in Mr. Vasan here. He would have a specific experience to share.
Yeah, Mr. Kamlesh, you are absolutely right. So initially, we even in NASSCOM, we were wanting to represent to you for having a lower safe harbor and all. Initially, when this work from home thought was put up for the first time, but we got an edge specifically with respect to software development services or SaaS as a service, and then healthcare in particular, where we were doing a lot of support. But there are few sectors like auto, on-road assistance, or project management, or infrastructure management, backend, remote access and management services. These all are engineering and auto based, where these ITES services have to shut their shop and then move on. So the one side of the story is very green. In fact, not even green. I'm using very green. It has super profits than what it was budgeted for 2020. And going forward also, it is really doing well. There is no second statement to that. But there are other sectors. So when we have one ITES as a bunch and don't segregate the other sectors where it has impact based on the primary core sector being down. So these all have a lot of baggage, overheads, employee cost sitting idle with vis-a-vis the revenue, which
Right.
was not to that extent.
Mr. Vasan, yeah, I think that's adequately made, the point that you're saying. And Mr. Vasan, we'd like you to consider in your policy making that there are instances where, and there are far too many companies that are grappling with this situation, and not everybody super profit. And the point being that the full cost plus method needs to be reviewed, and what is it that we can do and guidance that we can give to corporate in terms of demonstrating when the whole global business has had to significantly reduce, then what share of that can be brought to bear on the Indian companies as well, because ultimately instead of closing shop they're holding on to employment, and that's something which we ought to also consider as we go forward.
See, that is exactly what I'm trying to say is that Mr. Vasan did refer to a sector of IT which made super profit. Now, if that is the case, am I going to say that my cost plus entity which was working at cost plus 17% should now get more cost plus? I'm not going to say, because that will depend on the risk profiling. If this Indian entity which is providing back office service at cost plus 17% is not taking any risk of this matter, of demand and all those, then there is no case that extra profit which is coming should go to him.
Sure.
Similarly, if it is in a sector where there is a pressure on demand and there is a lesser profit, then should it margin get reduced? No, OECD guidance note is also saying exactly what I'm saying. It is saying that if you are not taking risk because of which there is a loss, then normally that loss should not come to you. Of course, you still have to delineate a transaction and see that whether in a third party situation, in arm's length situation, would you renegotiate the contract and be willing to take that loss? Now that will also depend on many factors, that what is your long-term relationship? Now, what is that, whether that loss is only for a temporary period or it is for a longer period. There are a lot of factors which are involved.
Sure.
You just cannot say that just because for COVID period of 1 year or 1.5 years, that because the parent company incurred loss, I am a back office service provider. As per my risk profiling pre-COVID, I am not taking any risk, then that loss should be passed on to me. that in itself, OECD guidance note has clearly said, no, this should not be done.
Okay. I think,
Yeah.
Mr. Varsha, what I'm taking away from whatever yourself and the other panelists have brought forward is that yes, there are a lot of open questions, but the OECD guidance is paramount, and that will need to be referred to by corporate as well as the tax administration. And what we heard from you earlier is that you would also be using that in training across the tax administration. And I think as we go along, we'll need to mutually kind of bring up the documentation to reflect and mirror the reality, and also reflect in intercompany agreements, and reflect that in the renegotiated contracts if required, to reflect the right amount of risk with the correct entity within the group, and not just carry on with the previous. Mr. Vasan, I am conscious that we're just about time, and I'll have time for one last question, which I want to pose to Mr. Varshney. Mr. Varshney, currently, as we hear from corporate, and everyone is happy about it, that for assessment year 1920, there are very few assessments that have been opened, which is a great thing for corporate. At the same time, when there's a windfall, there's also the fear that is something unexplained out there which might appear in future. So I'd like to know from you whether this is by design, the very few cases being selected, and what we can expect around that.
So it is actually, let us try to understand a very good question, that if less number of cases are selected, so what is the impact on tax administration? So probably, I think we probably need to understand a very critical point, that scrutiny assessment is one of the tool available with the tax administration. It is not an end itself. It is only a means to achieve an end. And the end is to increase voluntary compliance for taxes. Not only taxes, any law, if it has to be implemented effectively in any country, there has to be a voluntary compliance of that law. There has to be a respect for that law. Now that voluntary compliance and respect, how do we get it? We can get it through scrutiny assessment. We can get it through search and seizure in a few cases to provide deterrent against tax evasion, or we can get it through other means. And that other means probably, if you see in last few years, there is a focus to shift to those other means. Whether it is government or Department of Revenue or CBDT, they have always, brought out new reforms which has brought more transparency and efficiency in tax administration, whether it is faceless assessment, or I can give you some other example, which is also very important to understand how government is moving towards encouraging voluntary compliance by putting more faith on taxpayers. What used to happen a few years back was that if I get some information about a particular taxpayer, I will not share that information with the taxpayer. I will issue 148 notice. Now, that 148 notice may turn out to be a bad notice, because it was actually no income escaping assessment, but I have issued 148 notice. And taxpayer will say, there is nothing that I have evaded. Why have you issued 148 notice? Then I will say, no. First you file the return, then I will tell you the reason. Okay, no, that was the approach which we were following a few years back. But now the new approach is that I will tell you upfront that this is the information I have about you. And I will tell you even before you file your tax return. This year, if you go through annual information statement, you can know all your interest income, you can know all your dividend income, you can know all your capital gains. So basically, and it's not only my experience, I think all of you, we all have been showing our interest income correctly, but you probably would know that there are a lot of our family, friends, relatives, probably, saving bank interest, they might be earning more than 10,000, or FDI interest, because below 40,000, there is no TDS. There are few small FDI interest, saving bank interest, nobody used to show in tax return. But now when it is shown to you in your AIS, so that is how you increase voluntary compliance. because you know, अच्छा, हाँ ये तो मालूम है इसको department को. If I don't include in my return, then I'm going to get a notice. So this is one step. This is not the only step. There are many steps which government have taken and are going to take to make it more, citizen oriented, putting more faith on taxpayer, increasing voluntary compliance. So whether, even earlier, forget this year cycle where so many cases are selected. Even before that, we used to select only 0.5% or 0.4% cases for scrutiny. So if this year it is not 0.5, it is 0.3 or 0.2, I don't know what number it is, but it doesn't matter, frankly speaking, because there are so many other tools to achieve voluntary compliance. And the new direction of the Department of Revenue, of the Finance Ministry, is to ensure that we encourage voluntary compliance through these kind of use of technology. And the data that we have, can we use a technology to give that data to the taxpayer so that taxpayer himself files correct return or revises his return, so that we get our taxes upfront. We don't have to issue notice to the taxpayer. So this is also a very, this also requires a lot of work. So ultimately you have same manpower, whether the manpower will do scrutiny assessment or manpower will do verification of information, you have to reorient your department. So it is a part of the same exercise.
Sure. And thank you, Mr. Varshney. And on that positive, uplifting note, I'd like to bring the panel to a close. Thank you very much for your time. And I'll request Vicky to formally
Thank you.
close the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Then I do hope that we are in December with transfer pricing due dates falling next month, that our deliberations were useful and you would be able to factor and make your documentation more robust.
Well, congratulations and thank you, Fatima, to you and to each one of the panel members for very enriching discussions on the subject. We are especially grateful to Mr. Varshney for having joined us and shared his views with us. Thank you to Mr. Sudani and Mr. Vasan for sharing their insights. With this, we draw the conference to a close. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone,
Thank
for joining
you.
us.